It was 2:13 a.m. when the call came, tearing through the silence of Ethan Ward's penthouse. The city outside his floor-to-ceiling windows was painted in streaks of rain, neon, and shadows. Manhattan at that hour was supposed to be asleep, but Ethan had long since stopped believing in sleep. His life had become a carousel of late-night spreadsheets, boardroom battles, and an endless stream of unread messages. He liked the control of silence, the sense that the world was briefly his alone. That was why the sharp trill of his phone, vibrating across the marble countertop, felt like a violation. He almost ignored it. Almost. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number from Queens, attached to a hospital name. Hospitals didn't call billionaires without reason, and reason usually meant catastrophe. Ethan answered on the third ring, his voice clipped, a reflex honed from years of authority. Ward. A woman's voice carried across the line, steady and professional, but layered with something he couldn't place. Urgency, perhaps, or sorrow. Mr. Ward, this is Dr. Sloan from St. Gabriel's Hospital. I'm sorry to call you at this hour, but we found your name in a patient's file. There's a letter addressed to you. Ethan's fingers tightened around the phone. He kept his tone cool. Whose file? Marco Reyes. The name detonated in his chest like dynamite against stone. Marco, the best friend of his youth. The boy with the crooked grin who had believed in him before the world did. The one he hadn't spoken to properly in years, not since life had driven them into separate universes. Ethan into tech empires, Marco into a more fragile existence on the margins. They had shared everything once, even promises whispered in shabby dorm rooms. Dr. Sloan's voice pressed on, soft but unyielding. Mr. Reyes passed away earlier this evening. Among his personal effects was a sealed envelope labeled for you. He referenced a promise you once made. He also asked, in writing, that if anything happened to him, you would look after his daughter, Ava. A daughter. Ethan shut his eyes. Of course Marco had a daughter. Of course Marco hadn't told him. He felt a strange mixture of betrayal and grief twist through him, sharp as glass. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, already pulling on his coat. The drive to Queens was a blur of slick asphalt and the wiper's rhythmic protest. His mind wandered backward against his will, to the dorm room with peeling paint, the smell of stale pizza, and Marco laughing as he scrawled code onto a whiteboard they had stolen from a lecture hall. They had sworn promises in those days about loyalty, about never selling out, about looking after each other no matter what. It was the kind of oath boys made when they believed they were immortal. Ethan hadn't thought of it in years, but Marco had. Marco had remembered. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. Dr. Sloan met him at the entrance, clipboard in hand, her eyes heavy with the weight of too many night calls. She led him down a sterile corridor, the echo of their footsteps impossibly loud. She handed him the envelope, worn, creased, the ink slightly smudged as if touched by hands that knew time was short. He opened it, breath shallow. If you're reading this, I failed in ways I can't apologize for. You always had the spine I lacked, the discipline I envied. You remember our stupid promise. If I had a kid, you keep her safe if I couldn't. Well, I had a kid. Her name is Ava. She's everything good in me, multiplied, and everything bad, reduced. I couldn't give her the world she deserves. But you can. There's a trust in her name, and there are vultures circling it. A man named Kincaid especially. If you can stand in the doorway, don't let them through. I hate asking, but promises matter. You are always better at keeping them than me. Marco. The paper trembled in Ethan's hands. His throat constricted. He had buried Marco in his mind years ago, neatly filed under friendships lost to time. And yet, here Marco was, reaching across death with ink and desperation. Ethan felt something inside him splinter. Where is she? He asked. Dr. Sloan guided him to a waiting area. A girl sat slouched in a plastic chair, clutching a paper cup like it contained the last warmth in the world. 17, maybe, dark eyes sharp beneath the curtain of blunt-cut hair. Her clothes were worn but defiant. Ripped jeans, an oversized flannel. A backpack lay at her feet, patched and frayed, a soldier's shield in fabric. She looked up as he approached, and her gaze sliced through him, assessing, unsparing. "You're late," she said flatly. Ethan blinked. "I came as soon as. You're late to a promise." Her tone wasn't cruel, just factual, like an indictment read into record. The words knocked the breath from him. He fumbled. "I didn't know you existed." Her lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Figures. He wasn't exactly the kind of dad who broadcasted his private life. Guess he thought compartmentalizing would keep us safe. "I knew Marco," Ethan said softly. "I didn't know he had a kid, had someone who depended on him." Her voice sharpened, bitterness edged with grief. "Yeah, surprise." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." She shrugged, looking away. "Don't be." He did his best. It wasn't enough. Silence stretched. Ethan studied her, the too adult posture, the shadows under her eyes, the rawness in her words. Marco's daughter, undeniably, and suddenly, unbearably, his responsibility. "There's a man named Kincaid," Ava said abruptly. "He called before you showed up. Claims there's a trust in my name, and he's the temporary guardian." Which sounds like code for he decides my life and my money. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew Victor Kincaid. Everyone in the upper echelons of business did. Kincaid was a predator in a tailored suit, a man who saw grief as leverage and orphans as opportunities. The idea of him circling Ava lit a cold fire in Ethan's chest. "Do you have anywhere to stay?" he asked. Ava's eyes flickered. Had a place. The lease was in my mom's name, and she's gone. Landlord didn't like complicated. "So no, I can get you a hotel room," Ethan offered. She snorted softly. "And a key card is supposed to be a promise?" "It comes with protection," he said firmly. "And time. Time to fight Kincaid." Ava studied him for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "Fine. One night. Then we'll see." On the drive back to Manhattan, the silence between them was thick, but not empty. She finally asked, "What did he tell you about me?" Ethan considered. Marco had said little, but when he did, his eyes had carried a reverence words couldn't. "That you would be the best thing he ever did." Ava turned her face toward the rain-streaked window. Her voice was low. He wasn't wrong often. Just enough. The hotel suite was lavish, all glass and muted luxury. Ava stood in the doorway, wary, her backpack clutched tight. "If I sleep, something will change while I'm not looking." "That's always true," Ethan said gently. "Sleep anyway." She dropped the bag beside the bed, but didn't take off her shoes. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we stop Kincaid from turning you into inventory," he replied. She hesitated at the bedroom door. "Do you remember the exact words?" "From the promise." Ethan's throat ached. But he remembered. God help him, he remembered. "If you have a kid, and I have a spine, I'll keep her safe." Ava's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Let's test your spine." Then she disappeared into the room, leaving him alone with rain and regret. He was still staring at the letter when the knock came at 3:47 a.m. A courier in a gray suit handed him a thick packet. "Service of process." Ethan's stomach sank as he tore it open. "Temporary restraining order. Filed by Victor Kincaid. Effective immediately." It barred Ethan Ward from contacting or influencing Ava Reyes, citing credible allegations of undue influence and financial coercion. Signed by a knight, judge who likely skimmed the lies and stamped them anyway. Behind him, Ava's voice broke the silence. She stood barefoot, hoodie sleeves covering her fists. "Bad." Ethan looked at the paper, then at her. His answer was steady. "They want me to let go of the door." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you going to?" He set the packet down like poison. "No, I'm going to hold it with both hands." The city outside hummed, waiting. Dawn had not yet come, but the war had begun. The morning arrived not as sunlight, but as a judgment. Rain clouds still lingered over Manhattan, heavy and gray, as though the city itself understood the gravity of the day. Ethan Ward had not slept. He had spent the hours between the knock at his suite door and the break of dawn pacing the length of the glass-walled living room. Letter from Marco in one hand, restraining order in the other. Two papers. One, a plea from the past. The other, a command from the present. Between them stood a girl with tired eyes who had not asked for any of this. When Ava emerged from the bedroom, hoodie wrinkled from a night of uneasy sleep. She looked first at him, then at the documents spread across the table. Her jaw clenched. So, it wasn't a nightmare. No, Ethan admitted. Kincaid filed faster than I expected. He must have been waiting for the moment Marco's death became official. Ava's eyes hardened. Vultures don't wait. They circle. Ethan almost smiled at her phrasing. Almost. Instead, he picked up the phone and dialed Grace Liu. Grace answered on the first ring, her voice crisp despite the early hour. I saw the filing. We're on for 10 a.m. emergency hearing, Queens County Family Court. Kincaid's petition to be appointed guardian of the trust. He named you as a negative influence. I've already drafted a counter-motion. Good, Ethan said. What's our leverage? Grace exhaled. Not much. Kincaid plays dirty, but he knows procedure. The judge will lean on the fact that you're not family, not named in the trust, and the letter Marco left isn't a formal guardianship designation. We need character testimony, and we have Ava. Ethan cut in. Grace hesitated. Putting a 17-year-old on the stand this soon, it could backfire. Ava, listening, crossed her arms. I can handle it. Ethan glanced at her, saw the steel under the fatigue. We'll see, he said, though part of him already believed her. By 8, the suite buzzed with motion. Grace arrived in a tailored navy suit, files under her arm. She spread documents across the coffee table like a general preparing for war. Ava watched, perched on the edge of the couch, hands jammed into her sleeves. Victor Kincaid, Grace began, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed a man in his 50s, silver hair, perfectly cut, eyes sharp as broken glass. His smile was the kind cultivated for boardrooms and funerals alike, reassuring to the inattentive, predatory to those who looked closer. He's been circling Marco's trust for years, Grace continued. Technically, he was an advisor when Marco set it up. In practice, he's been maneuvering to take control. Now that Marco's gone, he sees an opportunity. And he thinks I'm the opportunity, Ava said bitterly. Grace didn't deny it. He'll frame you as vulnerable, alone, in need of responsible guidance. And he'll paint Ethan as a dangerous influence, someone with too much money, too much power, who can manipulate you. Can he? Ava asked, looking directly at Ethan. Ethan met her gaze evenly. I don't manipulate. I protect. And that's what I intend to do. A flicker passed over her face, something unreadable, but not dismissive. The courthouse in Queens was a far cry from Ethan's marble towers. It was an old building, lines of anxious families trailing through security, lawyers with worn briefcases shuffling past tired clerks. For Ethan, who was used to environments that bent to his will, it was a reminder. Here, money didn't command. Procedure did. Kincaid was already there, of course, waiting in the hallway outside the courtroom like a spider at the center of a web. His suit was charcoal, his tie understated, but everything about his presence radiated control. When his eyes landed on Ava, his smile broadened, a parody of warmth. Ava, he said smoothly, stepping forward. I was so sorry to hear about your father. He was a dear friend. I only wish he had let me do more for him while he was alive. Ava stiffened. Ethan moved subtly closer, though the restraining order loomed in his mind. He couldn't be seen as interfering. He could only watch. Kincaid turned his gaze to Ethan, and the warmth vanished. Ward, always in the middle of things that don't concern you. This concerns me, Ethan said evenly. Not legally, Kincaid countered, eyes glinting. That letter your friend scribbled is sentiment, not statute. You should know better than anyone. Courts don't care about promises. They care about paper. And the only paper that matters here names me. Grace stepped in, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. We'll see what the judge says. The hearing was held in a cramped courtroom, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Judge Morales, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and little patience, presided from a bench. She looked at the file before her, then at the people assembled. Petitioner Victor Kincaid seeks guardianship of the Reyes Trust, established for the benefit of minor Ava Reyes, age 17. Respondent Ethan Ward contests on the basis of a personal letter from the deceased father, Marco Reyes. Let's proceed. Kincaid's attorney, a slick man with 2 white teeth, launched into his opening. He spoke of stability, of Kincaid's long history in finance, of his ability to safeguard Ava's future. He painted Ethan as a dangerous outsider, an unpredictable billionaire with too much influence, too much power. Mr. Ward, the attorney intoned, has no legal connection to Ava Reyes. He is not a relative, not a guardian, not even a family friend in recent years. Yet he swoops in, hours after Marco's death, inserting himself into her life. The optics speak for themselves. Ethan clenched his jaw but stayed silent. Grace's hand on his arm was a reminder. Not yet. Then it was Grace's turn. She stood, posture precise, voice calm but edged. Marco Reyes may not have filed formal guardianship documents, but he did something more powerful. He trusted. He left a letter naming Ethan Ward as the person he believed could protect his daughter. That matters. And Ava herself deserves to be heard. This isn't just about financial stewardship. It's about who Marco wanted standing in the doorway of his daughter's life. Judge Morales studied Grace, then Ava. Miss Reyes, would you like to speak? The courtroom shifted. Ava rose, her shoulders squared despite the tremor in her hands. She stepped to the witness stand, eyes sweeping the room before landing, inevitably, on Ethan. My dad, she began, voice cracking. She steadied it. My dad wasn't perfect, but he loved me, and he trusted Mr. Ward. He told me once that Mr. Ward was the only person who ever kept a promise to him. That has to count for something, because promises they're all I have left of him. Kincaid's lawyer pounced. Miss Reyes, isn't it true you only met Mr. Ward for the first time last night? Yes. And yet you expect this court to believe you'd be safe in his care? Ava's eyes flashed. Safer than with someone who called the hospital before my father's body was even cold. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Morales's eyes narrowed. Kincaid's jaw tightened, the first crack in his polished mask. Grace rose again, calm but lethal. No further questions. The hearing stretched into hours. Arguments volleyed. Objections sustained and overruled. By the end, the judge leaned back, expression unreadable. I will review the filings and issue a temporary order this afternoon, she said. Until then, Miss Reyes will remain under the care of the court's designated social services. Ava's face fell. Ethan's fists clenched under the table. Kincaid's smile returned, thin and victorious. But as they were filing out, Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, eyes widening. She turned to Ethan, her voice low but electric. Marco left something else, she whispered. An addendum. We just found it in his old email archives. It changes everything. Ethan looked at her, then at Ava, whose eyes burned with fragile hope. For the first time that morning, he felt the ground tilt in their favor. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The courthouse cafeteria smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, a poor consolation for the weight of the morning. Ethan sat across from Grace and Ava at a scratched plastic table, the restraining order still humming in his pocket like a live wire. Ava pushed a bag of chips around the table without opening it. Her face was pale, her eyes darker than ever, but there was a fire smoldering there. Grace had her laptop open, a thumb drive inserted. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if she was about to detonate something. She took a slow breath before speaking. Marco wasn't sloppy, she said quietly. Everyone thought he was disorganized, scattered. But look at this. She tapped the screen, pulling up a file directory. A string of encrypted folders appeared, labeled with odd codes that looked random until you looked closer. Ethan leaned forward. The top folder was marked, Avarize_17. Grace clicked it open. Inside was a PDF, dated 2 months before Marco's death. The subject line, Addendum to Trust Agreement. Ava straightened in her chair, her hand frozen over the chips. He really did it, she whispered. Grace nodded. It's not notarized, not in the traditional sense, but it's digitally signed, time-stamped, and backed up to a blockchain ledger. That's as strong as any signature in this century. Ethan's pulse quickened. What does it say? Grace opened the file. The words filled the screen, stark and deliberate. In the event of my incapacity or death, I direct that guardianship of my daughter, Ava Reyes, and oversight of the Reyes Trust be entrusted to Ethan Ward. Ethan has been my friend, my brother, and the only person who ever kept a promise to me. I do not trust Victor Kincaid or any entity associated with him to act in Ava's best interest. This directive reflects my wishes fully and freely. It was signed electronically Marco Reyes. Silence pressed against the table like a hell breath. Ava blinked hard, swallowing. He did think about me. He thought about both of us. Grace's face was taut. This is powerful. But Kincaid won't let it stand without a fight. He'll argue about admissibility, authenticity, chain of custody. He'll call it forged, fabricated, desperate. He'll call me desperate, Ethan muttered. And he'll be right. Because I am. Ava looked at him, then really looked, and something shifted between them. It wasn't trust yet, not fully. But it was the recognition of someone willing to bleed for her. Before Grace could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the message, and her lips thinned. Speak of the devil. Kincaid just filed an emergency motion. He's bringing in a supposed relative, some uncle from California claiming blood ties. They'll use him to undercut your standing, Ethan. A family member always looks better than a friend. Ava's face hardened. I don't have an uncle. My dad didn't have brothers. Maybe not, Grace said grimly. But Kincaid will pay someone to say otherwise. The afternoon hearing was tense. The courtroom was fuller this time, journalists trickling in, their cameras flashing in the hallway. The case of a billionaire tangled in guardianship over a teenage girl was irresistible to headlines. Ethan hated it, the spectacle, the intrusion, but there was no hiding now. Kincaid entered with a tall man in a cheap suit at his side, graying hair slicked back, posture rehearsed. This is Samuel Reyes, Kincaid's lawyer declared smoothly. The paternal uncle of Ava Reyes, here to assert his rightful guardianship claim. Ava stood abruptly. That's a lie. Her voice cracked through the room like a whip. I don't know that man. My dad never mentioned him once. The judge raised a hand. Miss Reyes, you will sit. Ava sat, trembling with fury. Ethan's hands twitched on the table. He wanted to shout, to drag the imposter out by the collar, but Grace leaned in, whispering, stay calm. Trust me. Kincaid's attorney paraded the fake uncle through testimony, complete with forged birth records and fabricated family photos. Grainy black and whites doctored to include him beside Marco in his 20s. It was obscene, and yet, to a tired judge with a heavy docket, it could look plausible. Then it was Grace's turn. She rose, her presence commanding despite her slight frame. Your Honor, we challenge the authenticity of these records. Furthermore, we have newly uncovered evidence, a digital addendum authored and signed by Marco Reyes himself. This document explicitly names Ethan Ward as guardian and explicitly rejects Victor Kincaid. Gasps rippled through the room. Kincaid's jaw tightened. Forgery, he spat. Grace's smile was razor-thin. We anticipated you'd say that, which is why we've brought an independent cryptography expert to validate the signature. He is prepared to testify. The judge frowned, clearly weighing the disruption against the gravity. Proceed tomorrow morning. This court is adjourned until then. The gavel came down, and just like that, the room exploded in murmurs. Journalists scribbled, cameras flashed, and Ethan felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. But all he saw was Ava, her small frame taut with fury and exhaustion. Outside the courtroom, she grabbed his sleeve, just for a second, just long enough to anchor him. You believe me, right? About that man not being family. Ethan met her gaze. I don't need proof to know he isn't. I knew Marco. I knew the lines he drew. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Then don't let them erase him. Don't let them erase me. He wanted to tell her he wouldn't. That nothing would tear him from his promise now. But words felt fragile in the face of what they were up against. Instead, he nodded once, firm, unshakable. That night, back at the suite, exhaustion pressed down like lead. Ava curled on the sofa with her backpack clutched to her chest, unwilling to move to the bed. Ethan sat opposite her, the glow of the city beyond the glass walls, painting them both in fractured light. You knew him best, Ava said suddenly, voice low. My dad. Tell me something about him that wasn't broken. Ethan's chest tightened. He thought of Marco's crooked grin, his unstoppable optimism, the way he had believed in Ethan before anyone else had. He never gave up on people, even when he should have. He saw good where others only saw risk. Ava's eyes shimmered. That's what got him killed. Or what made him human, Ethan said softly. They sat in silence after that, the weight of memory filling the space between them. At 2:14 a.m., almost exactly 24 hours after the first call, Grace texted, We decrypted the metadata. There's more in the addendum than we realized. Ethan's stomach tightened. He rose, crossing to his laptop, opening the secure file Grace sent. Ava padded over, bare feet silent against the marble. Together, they leaned over the screen as the hidden section unfolded. Marco's words appeared, stark, undeniable. If I am gone, know this. Victor Kincaid has leverage over me. He is something I could never speak of. If he uses it against Ava, it will destroy her. Ethan, you're the only one who can bury it. Promise me you'll try. The screen glowed in the dark, a beacon and a curse. Ava's hand trembled where it clutched her hoodie sleeve. What leverage? She whispered. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He had no answer. Not yet. But one truth crystallized in his mind. Marco hadn't just left him a promise. He had left him a battlefield. And the war had only just begun. The storm outside Manhattan had subsided. But inside Ethan's penthouse, tension only thickened. The decrypted addendum still glowed faintly on the laptop screen. Marco's final words etched in sharp, irreversible text. Victor Kincaid has leverage over me. If he uses it against Ava, it will destroy her. Ethan closed the laptop slowly, the soft click echoing like a verdict. Ava sat curled in the armchair across from him, hoodie pulled tight around her thin frame, face pale, but her eyes wide and burning. Destroy me? She whispered. What does that even mean? Grace, still standing with her phone in hand, pressed her lips together. It means whatever Kincaid has, it's not financial. If it were about the trust, Marco would have fought it openly. No, this is personal. Something deep enough that Marco couldn't risk speaking it out loud. Ava hugged her knees tighter. My dad wasn't perfect. I know that. But he didn't keep secrets like that. Not from me. Ethan almost said everyone keeps secrets, but bit it back. The girl had lost enough already. Cynicism wasn't what she needed. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Whatever it is, we'll find it before Kincaid does. That's a promise. Ava's eyes flickered to him, searching, as though testing the weight of the word promise. After a beat, she nodded slightly, but her jaw stayed tense. By morning, the battle had moved outside. The press had caught the scent. Headlines screamed across tabloids and online feeds. Tech billionaire caught in custody fight over teen heiress. Who really owns the Reyes fortune? Mysterious addendum could rewrite $200 million trust. When Ava stepped out of the elevator with Ethan and Grace, flashes exploded. Reporters crowded the lobby of the building. Microphones thrust forward, questions sharp as blades. Ava, do you trust Ethan Ward? Mr. Ward, are you manipulating this girl for her inheritance? Is it true Marco Reyes doubted his daughter's parentage? That last question sliced through the din. Ava froze. Her hand trembled as she tried to shield her face. Ethan's arm twitched toward her instinctively, but the restraining order chained him in place. All he could do was glare, his presence towering a silent warning. Grace stepped in front, her voice cutting like a whip. No questions. Clear the way. Security pushed them through to the waiting car, but Ava's silence in the back seat was louder than the reporters had been. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes fixed on the passing blur of the city. Ethan sat beside her, the weight of helplessness pressing on his chest. You heard them, Ava muttered finally, voice brittle. They think I'm not even his daughter, that I don't belong to him at all. Ethan turned to her sharply. They're wrong. And Kincaid planted that story. But what if? She stopped herself, biting the inside of her cheek. Her voice dropped. What if he's right? Silence filled the car, heavy and suffocating. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Because beneath his fury at Kincaid, a sliver of doubt wormed its way in. If Marco had hidden something, if there really was leverage tied to Ava's bloodline, then the battlefield was worse than they imagined. Grace leaned forward from the front seat. We'll prove it. With DNA if we have to. Kincaid can manufacture headlines, but he can't manufacture truth. Ava let out a shaky breath, not quite reassured, but steadier. Ethan filed away the thought. DNA. They might need it sooner than they liked. The day's hearing was merciless. Kincaid's lawyer hammered again and again on Ethan's lack of legal standing, parading the so-called uncle like a banner of legitimacy. The judge didn't buy it completely, but doubt lingered in her sharp eyes. Every raised eyebrow, every question about blood relation was another fracture in their defense. Grace fought back fiercely, presenting cryptographic experts to verify Marco's digital addendum. The experts confirmed the signature's authenticity, the timestamp's validity, the blockchain record's immutability. But Kincaid countered with a smirk. Even if it's genuine, it doesn't erase the possibility that Marco himself was misled. Ethan clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. During recess, Grace cornered him in the hallway. We need proof, Ethan. Something bigger than Marco's word, bigger than Ava's testimony. Kincaid's moving to attack her identity. If he convinces the judge she isn't Marco's biological daughter, the trust could collapse, and we lose everything. Ethan's voice was gravel. So we prove she is. How? Grace asked. His eyes darkened. We dig where Marco never wanted anyone to dig. That night, after Ava finally retreated to the guest room, Ethan and Grace spread files across the living room table. Hospital records, old business contracts, scraps of emails Marco had sent years ago. They hunted for threads, anything pointing to what Kincaid might be holding. Around midnight, Ethan found it. A hospital invoice, half buried in an email archive, dated 17 years ago. It wasn't for Marco. It was for an unnamed patient X, but the billing address was Marco's apartment, and the date aligned almost exactly with Ava's birth. Grace leaned over his shoulder, reading the line item. Her face drained of color. Paternity testing. Ethan's stomach dropped. Marco ran a DNA test. The file ended there, no results attached, just a receipt. If Kincaid had the results, if the leverage was proof Ava wasn't Marco's biological child, then everything could collapse. At 2 a.m., Ethan sat in the darkened penthouse, staring out over the sleepless city. His reflection looked back at him in the glass, haunted, furious, resolute. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Ava. She stood in the doorway, hoodie draped over her shoulders like armor, eyes too old for her years. You found something, she said quietly. Ethan didn't lie. Maybe, but it doesn't change how your father loved you. Her lips trembled. Love doesn't matter in court. Then we'll make it matter, Ethan said fiercely. I promised him, and I promised you. For the first time, Ava stepped closer, sitting beside him on the wide leather chair. Not touching, not leaning, but near enough that the distance between them shrank. In the silence that followed, two truths hung unspoken. Marco's secrets were about to explode, and Victor Kincaid was tightening the noose. The following morning, an envelope was delivered to the penthouse, unmarked but deliberate. Ethan opened it carefully, Grace at his side. Inside was a thin folder. He pulled it free, his gut tightening with every page. Medical records, legal affidavits, photographs. At the top of the stack, stamped in bold letters, confidential, Reyes versus Ward. Ethan froze. His name. Grace's face blanched. Oh my God. Ava stepped forward, her eyes wide with fear. What is it? Ethan couldn't speak, because what stared back at him wasn't just leverage. It was a weapon sharp enough to cut them all to pieces. And Kincaid had just placed it in his hands, daring him to move. The folder lay heavy in Ethan's hands, though it weighed no more than a few ounces. He stared at the cover sheet again, bold letters drilling into him. Confidential, Reyes versus Ward. His own name, tethered to Marco's, bound by something dark enough to be sealed away for years. Grace leaned closer, her voice hushed but sharp. Open it. Ava stood a step behind, arms folded across her chest like she was bracing for impact. She was 17, but in that moment she carried herself like someone decades older, someone who had already seen too many truths she didn't ask for. Ethan's fingers hesitated. He had faced hostile boardrooms, political adversaries, even the gnawing emptiness of his own lonely empire. But this felt like a trap sprung specifically for him. Still, he pulled the first page free. The document was a petition, never filed, but drafted with surgical precision. Marco Reyes versus Ethan Ward. Alleging fraud, breach of contract, emotional distress. Attached were depositions, and signed but damning, painting Ethan as a manipulator who had taken advantage of Marco at his weakest. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. He skimmed lines that twisted half-truths into blades. Ward pressured me into transferring intellectual property. Ward's influence endangered my daughter's stability. Ward's wealth created coercion rather than choice. This is fabricated, Ethan muttered. But even to his ears, it sounded defensive. Grace's brows furrowed as she flipped deeper. Look here. Dates. This was drafted the same year the trust was created. 17 years ago. If Kincaid got hold of this, he could spin it as Marco regretting naming you. He could argue the addendum is a contradiction. Ethan's stomach nodded. Marco never filed it. He must have written it under pressure. Grace nodded, which means Kincaid had leverage even then. He forced Marco to draft this to keep in his pocket. Now he's releasing it. Ava stepped forward, snatching a page from Ethan's grip. Her eyes scanned the words quickly, then narrowed. This isn't my dad. He never wrote like this. Look at the phrasing. Coercion through financial disparity? He didn't talk like a textbook. He talked like a person. This is someone else's voice using his name. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she slammed the paper back onto the pile. He wouldn't have turned on you. Not after what you did for him. Ethan's throat tightened. What did I do for him? He asked softly. Ava blinked, startled. Didn't he tell you? The silence that followed was deafening. Ava bit her lip, realizing she had revealed something she shouldn't have. Grace's sharp eyes flicked between them, but said nothing. Ethan exhaled slowly. No, he didn't. For the first time, Ethan saw Ava falter, not just with grief or anger, but with the realization that she held a piece of Marco's past Ethan had never been given. Before he could press further, Grace snapped the folder shut. We can't linger on this. Kincaid dropped it here for a reason. He wants Ethan rattled. He wants Ava questioning who to trust. We need to control the narrative before he files this in court. Ow! Ethan asked, his voice harder now. Grace tapped the folder. We prove Marco never intended to pursue it. That this was coerced, maybe even ghost-written. We dig into the year it was drafted, find out who Marco was dealing with, what pressure he was under. If Kincaid had his claws in back then, this is the smoking gun. Ava hugged her arms tighter around herself. And if it's not? If it's real? Ethan turned toward her, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Then we face it, together. Her eyes flickered distrust, longing, fear, all colliding. She didn't answer. By the next morning, the press frenzy had metastasized. News anchors debated whether Ethan Ward was savior or predator, whether Ava Reyes was a pawn in a billionaire custody drama. Hashtags trended. Students at Ava's school whispered, posted, dissected. Her phone buzzed endlessly until Ethan had Grace confiscated. At the courthouse, Kincaid arrived with a smugness so sharp it could cut glass. He carried no folder, no briefcase, just the confidence of a man who knew his trap had been sprung. The hearing opened with his attorney presenting the Reyes versus Ward draft as evidence of intent. The lawyer's voice was smooth, almost pitying. Mr. Reyes, shortly after creating the trust, clearly sought to distance himself from Mr. Ward. Though this petition was never filed, its existence speaks volumes. It establishes doubt as to whether the addendum was free of undue influence. Gasps fluttered through the gallery. The judge's brows lifted. Grace rose immediately. Your Honor, this is a draft, and signed, unfiled, and discovered under suspicious circumstances. We will show it was fabricated or coerced. And more importantly, we will show Ava Reyes herself is the best evidence of Marco's intent. She turned slightly, gesturing to the girl seated at the table. Ava's chin lifted, her hands clenched. The judge eyed her. "Miss Reyes, would you like to speak?" The room stilled. Reporters leaned forward. Even Kincaid's smirk wavered. Ava stood, every inch of her trembling, but her voice clear. "My dad trusted Ethan Ward more than anyone. If he wrote those words, it wasn't because he believed them. It was because someone wanted him to. And I think we all know who that someone is." Her gaze sliced toward Kincaid like a blade. The gallery buzzed. Kincaid's lawyer objected, but the judge silenced him with a sharp rap of her gavel. The hearing adjourned with no ruling, only a promise. The court would investigate the document's origins. As they filed out, cameras flashing, Ava walked close beside Ethan. Not touching, never touching, but close enough that he could feel the defiance radiating from her. But that night, when Grace finally left to prepare motions, Ethan found her standing by the window of the penthouse, staring down at the glittering sprawl of the city. "You're not telling me everything," she said softly. Ethan stiffened. "What do you mean?" She turned, her eyes wet but burning. "My dad told me once that you saved him, that you pulled him out of something I wasn't supposed to know about. And now Kincaid has this weapon, and you're looking at it like you've seen it before. So tell me the truth. What did you and my dad do that he was so afraid of?" The air hung heavy between them. Ethan's chest ached with the weight of words unsaid, memories buried deep, choices made in desperation. He had promised Marco he'd never speak of it. But now, looking at Ava, Marco's eyes staring at him, demanding, he felt the promise cracking. Before he could answer, Grace burst back in, phone in hand, face pale. "We've got a bigger problem," she said breathlessly. "The hospital just released records, leaked, probably by Kincaid. And they suggest Ava might not be Marco's biological daughter." Ava went still. Ethan's heart clenched. Grace looked at them both, voice low. "This isn't just about guardianship anymore. Kincaid's trying to erase Ava's very identity." The war had shifted, and the battlefield had never been more dangerous. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum that night. Silent, heavy, suffocating. The leaked hospital records sat open on the coffee table, the words glowing like poison. Paternity inconclusive. Ava sat stiffly on the sofa, knees tucked to her chest, hoodie drawn over her head. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from classmates, strangers, journalists, all of them dissecting her identity like vultures picking over a carcass. She had turned the screen face down, but the vibration still rattled against the wood, a cruel heartbeat. Ethan stood by the window, the city burning below him in endless lights. His fists were jammed into his pockets, jaw tight enough to crack. Grace paced the room with her phone, whispering rapid-fire instructions to her team. But even her practiced composure cracked as she muttered, "If Kincaid controls hospital access, he can spin any narrative he wants." Ava finally spoke, her voice brittle. "So it's true, then? I might not even be his daughter." Ethan spun around. "No, it means Kincaid wants you to think that. It means he's willing to fabricate, to twist records, to tear you apart for power. That's all it means." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "But what if he's not twisting anything? What if my dad lied to me my whole life?" The words gutted Ethan. Marco had lied before. Ethan knew that better than anyone. But this? To hide something so fundamental? He wanted to promise her it wasn't true, that Marco's love had been absolute, that blood didn't matter. But Ava wasn't a child who could be soothed with platitudes. She was a girl who had lost her father, who was being stripped of his name, his fortune, and now his very bloodline. Grace ended her call and crouched in front of Ava, her tone soft but steady. "Listen to me. Even if a test says otherwise, even if Marco wasn't your biological father, it doesn't erase who raised you. He chose you. That choice is stronger than DNA." Ava's lips trembled. The court won't care about choice. They'll care about biology. Silence. The cruel truth hung there. Ethan finally said, "Then we'll fight them with both. Biology and choice. We'll find the real records, the real truth, and if we have to, we'll run new tests under our own control. Kincaid doesn't get to decide who you are." The following days blurred into war. Grace filed urgent motions demanding independent verification of the leaked hospital files. She subpoenaed the original lab technicians, the chain of custody, everything that could prove tampering. Ethan, meanwhile, activated his private network of investigators, the same shadowy infrastructure he had once sworn never to use again. If Kincaid was digging through graves, Ethan would unearth the grave digger. But Ava couldn't escape the fallout. At school, whispers turned to stares, stares turned to posts, posts turned viral. Fake heiress. Trust fund fraud. Not a Reyes at all. She lasted 3 hours before locking herself in a bathroom stall, scrolling through feeds until the words blurred and her chest heaved. When Ethan arrived to pick her up, ignoring the restraining order and the disapproving principal, he found her sitting on the curb, hood pulled low, face streaked with tears. The sight broke something inside him. He couldn't touch her, couldn't pull her into his arms, so he did the only thing he could, stood guard beside her like a wall against the world. She whispered, "I wish I could disappear." His voice was rough. "I won't let you." That night, Grace dropped a bombshell. She had tracked down the obstetrician listed on Ava's birth records, a retired doctor living quietly in New Jersey. If anyone could confirm the truth, it was her. The next morning, Ethan and Grace drove Ava out to the small suburban home. The doctor, Dr. Lorraine Whitaker, was in her 70s now, sharp-eyed despite the years. She ushered them inside reluctantly, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "I remember Marco," she said softly. "He was desperate. The day Ava was born, he begged me to destroy the records. Said there could be no mistakes, no leaks. I told him it wasn't possible, but he insisted." Ava leaned forward, voice shaking. "Why? Why would he want that?" The doctor hesitated, then sighed. "Because the truth of conception was complicated. Marco wasn't certain he was the biological father. But he loved you, child. From the first moment he saw you, he swore you were his." Ava froze. Tears welled in her eyes. So it was true. He didn't know. Ethan's gut twisted. He reached out instinctively, stopping short of touching her hand. "He still chose you, Ava. Every day after that." Dr. Whitaker lowered her gaze. "He told me he'd make sure no one ever questioned it, that his daughter would never grow up doubting who she was." But now, thanks to Kincaid, that shield was shattered. On the drive back, Ava was silent, staring out the window at the gray blur of highways. Grace typed furiously on her laptop, filing notes for motions, but Ethan's focus never left the girl in the back seat. When they reached the city, Ava finally spoke. "All my life, I thought my dad believed in me because I was his. But now I know he believed in me, even when he wasn't sure. And that's worse, because it means even love has a condition." Ethan's chest ached. "No, it means love had no condition. That's the point." She didn't answer, but he saw the silent war on her face. That evening, another envelope arrived. No return address, but the seal was familiar. Kincaid's mocking precision. Inside was a single photo. Grainy, but clear enough. Marco in his 20s, arms slung around a woman Ethan didn't recognize. Blonde, sharp-featured, eyes eerily like Ava's. On the back, scrawled in ink, "Ask her who Ava really is." Ethan's hand shook as he turned the photo over. The war wasn't about to slow. It was about to rip open wounds none of them were ready to face. And as Ava walked into the room, catching sight of the photograph, her breath hitched. "That's her," she whispered. "That's the woman I've seen in my dreams." The walls of their fragile truth were collapsing. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum that night. Silent, heavy, suffocating. The leaked hospital records sat open on the coffee table, the words glowing like poison. Paternity inconclusive. Ava sat stiffly on the sofa, knees tucked to her chest, hoodie drawn over her head. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from classmates, strangers, journalists, all of them dissecting her identity like vultures picking over a carcass. She had turned the screen face down, but the vibration still rattled against the wood, a cruel heartbeat. Ethan stood by the window, the city burning below him in endless lights. His fists were jammed into his pockets, jaw tight enough to crack. Grace paced the room with her phone, whispering rapid-fire instructions to her team. But even her practiced composure cracked as she muttered, "If Kincaid controls hospital access, he can spin any narrative he wants." Ava finally spoke, her voice brittle. "So it's true, then? I might not even be his daughter." Ethan spun around. "No. It means Kincaid wants you to think that. It means he's willing to fabricate, to twist records, to tear you apart for power. That's all it means." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "But what if he's not twisting anything? What if my dad lied to me my whole life?" The words gutted Ethan. Marco had lied before. Ethan knew that better than anyone. But this? To hide something so fundamental? He wanted to promise her it wasn't true, that Marco's love had been absolute, that blood didn't matter. But Ava wasn't a child who could be soothed with platitudes. She was a girl who had lost her father, who was being stripped of his name, his fortune, and now his very bloodline. Grace ended her call and crouched in front of Ava, her tone soft but steady. "Listen to me. Even if a test says otherwise, even if Marco wasn't your biological father, it doesn't erase who raised you. He chose you. That choice is stronger than DNA." Ava's lips trembled. The court won't care about choice. They'll care about biology. Silence. The cruel truth hung there. Ethan finally said, "Then we'll fight them with both. Biology and choice. We'll find the real records, the real truth, and if we have to, we'll run new tests under our own control. Kincaid doesn't get to decide who you are." The following days blurred into war. Grace filed urgent motions demanding independent verification of the leaked hospital files. She subpoenaed the original lab technicians, the chain of custody, everything that could prove tampering. Ethan, meanwhile, activated his private network of investigators, the same shadowy infrastructure he had once sworn never to use again. If Kincaid was digging through graves, Ethan would unearth the grave digger. But Ava couldn't escape the fallout. At school, whispers turned to stares, stares turned to posts, posts turned viral. Fake heiress. Trust fund fraud. Not a Reyes at all. She lasted 3 hours before locking herself in a bathroom stall, scrolling through feeds until the words blurred and her chest heaved. When Ethan arrived to pick her up, ignoring the restraining order and the disapproving principal, he found her sitting on the curb, hood pulled low, face streaked with tears. The sight broke something inside him. He couldn't touch her, couldn't pull her into his arms, so he did the only thing he could, stood guard beside her like a wall against the world. She whispered, "I wish I could disappear." His voice was rough. "I won't let you." That night, Grace dropped a bombshell. She had tracked down the obstetrician listed on Ava's birth records, a retired doctor living quietly in New Jersey. If anyone could confirm the truth, it was her. The next morning, Ethan and Grace drove Ava out to the small suburban home. The doctor, Dr. Lorraine Whitaker, was in her 70s now, sharp-eyed despite the years. She ushered them inside reluctantly, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "I remember Marco," she said softly. "He was desperate. The day Ava was born, he begged me to destroy the records. So there could be no mistakes, no leaks. I told him it wasn't possible, but he insisted." Ava leaned forward, voice shaking. "Why? Why would he want that?" The doctor hesitated, then sighed. "Because the truth of conception was complicated. Marco wasn't certain he was the biological father. But he loved you, child. From the first moment he saw you, he swore you were his." Ava froze. Tears welled in her eyes. So it was true. He didn't know. Ethan's gut twisted. He reached out instinctively, stopping short of touching her hand. "He still chose you, Ava. Every day after that." Dr. Whitaker lowered her gaze. "He told me he'd make sure no one ever questioned it, that his daughter would never grow up doubting who she was. But now, thanks to Kincaid, that shield was shattered." On the drive back, Ava was silent, staring out the window at the gray blur of highways. Grace typed furiously on her laptop, filing notes for motions, but Ethan's focus never left the girl in the back seat. When they reached the city, Ava finally spoke. "All my life, I thought my dad believed in me because I was his. But now I know he believed in me, even when he wasn't sure. And that's worse, because it means even love has a condition." Ethan's chest ached. "No, it means love had no condition. That's the point." She didn't answer, but he saw the silent war on her face. That evening, another envelope arrived. No return address, but the seal was familiar, Kincaid's mocking precision. Inside was a single photo, grainy, but clear enough. Marco in his 20s, arms slung around a woman Ethan didn't recognize. Blonde, sharp-featured, eyes eerily like Ava's. On the back, scrawled in ink, "Ask her who Ava really is." Ethan's hand shook as he turned the photo over. The war wasn't about to slow. It was about to rip open wounds none of them were ready to face. And as Ava walked into the room, catching sight of the photograph, her breath hitched. "That's her," she whispered. "That's the woman I've seen in my dreams." The walls of their fragile truth were collapsing. The courthouse was overflowing the morning Catherine Hale, now Catherine Rivers, stepped into the witness stand. Reporters lined the marble steps. Cameras flashed like lightning. And by the time Ethan, Grace, and Ava arrived, the narrative had already shifted. Headlines screamed, "Biological mother returns. Ava Reyes, not Marco's daughter?" Catherine Rivers breaks silence after 17 years. Ava kept her hood low as they pushed through the throng, Ethan shielding her like a fortress. She had barely spoken since Boston, since hearing Catherine confirm the truth with her own lips. The girl who once sparred with Ethan at every turn now moved beside him silently, weighed down by questions that even he couldn't answer. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Kincaid sat smugly at his table, his silk tie perfectly knotted, his expression carved with satisfaction. This was his stage, and Catherine was about to become his star witness. When she swore in and sat down, Ava's breath caught. She looked smaller under the fluorescent lights, nervous but coached. Kincaid's lawyer began gently, as though guiding her through a confession. "Mrs. Rivers, can you tell the court about your relationship with the late Marco Reyes?" Her voice trembled. "We were engaged. We planned a life together. But when I became pregnant, everything changed." "And what happened?" She glanced at Ava, one fleeting look of guilt before continuing. "Marco doubted he was the father. He told me if I carried the baby, he would raise her as his own, but only if I left quietly. He said my presence would ruin her stability. So I agreed, believing it was best for Ava." Ava flinched as though struck. Ethan's hand twitched on the table, gripping the edge until his knuckles whitened. "And is Ava Reyes your biological daughter?" Catherine's eyes filled, tears rolling unchecked. "Yes, she is mine, but Marco may not be her father." The words detonated. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, and Ava's world tilted. Her chest heaved, her nails digging crescents into her palms beneath the table. Ethan leaned close, whispering fiercely, "Breathe. Look at me." She couldn't. All she saw was Catherine's face, confirming every fear Kincaid had planted. Grace rose for cross-examination, her tone sharp but measured. "Mrs. Rivers, you claim you were forced to leave Ava with Marco. Yet you admit you allowed him to raise her for 17 years without contesting custody, without support, without even a visit. Is that correct?" Catherine hesitated. "Yes, but..." No further questions. Grace cut her off, her eyes cold. She wanted the jury, and Ava, to see the cracks in Catherine's narrative. But the damage was done. Kincaid leaned back, smirk widening. After the session adjourned, Ethan guided Ava quickly out a side door, away from the cameras. She ripped her arm free once they reached the street. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice raw. "You knew there was more. You knew my dad wasn't perfect, and you let me believe he was." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Because he wanted that for you. He wanted you to remember him as the man who loved you, not the man who lied." Her eyes blazed. "And what about you? You stood by him. You knew, didn't you? You knew she was out there." The accusation pierced deeper than she realized. Ethan swallowed hard. "I knew pieces, not the whole. But I kept his secrets because I made a promise. Promises don't erase lies." Ava snapped, tears burning down her cheeks. "They just make you part of them." She turned and stormed away before he could answer. That night, the penthouse was unbearably silent. Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at Marco's photo on the desk. His best friend, his brother in arms, the man he had sworn to protect even after death. And now that loyalty was unraveling everything. Ava's trust, the case, the promise itself. Grace entered quietly, dropping a folder on the desk. "We need to talk." Inside were bank records. Wire transfers from Marco's accounts to Catherine's over the years. Small, irregular, but undeniable. She wasn't gone, Grace said. He supported her, quietly, which means he kept her close enough to control, but far enough to hide from Ava. That undermines Kincaid's story. "We can spin this." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Spin? Grace, this isn't just strategy. It's a 17-year-old girl's life being ripped apart. She doesn't need spin. She needs truth." Grace softened, studying him. "Then give it to her. Stop protecting Marco. Stop protecting yourself. Tell her everything." Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't sure he could. Some truths were weapons sharper than any Kincaid held. Meanwhile, Ava sat on the balcony, knees hugged to her chest, the city lights blurring through tears. She replayed Catherine's testimony over and over, each word a fresh wound. My presence would ruin her stability. Marco may not be her father. The words echoed until they fused with her own fears. Who am I, if not his daughter? Who am I, if not a Reyes? And beneath it all, one thought festered. Why does Ethan keep choosing promises over me? The next day, the war escalated. Kincaid held a press conference on the courthouse steps, parading Catherine at his side. This case is about truth, he proclaimed, his voice oiled with sincerity. About protecting Ava from false guardianship and manipulation. Marco Reyes, rest his soul, wanted what was best for her. We will honor his intent. The cameras loved it. Catherine's tearful face became the headline. Ava's image beside hers, the daughter caught between. Inside the penthouse, Ava slammed the TV off. They're using her, and she's letting them. Ethan stood behind her, his tone grim. Not for long. We'll turn it. Ow! Ava challenged. Every time we fight back, they pull out something worse. First the fake petition, then the hospital files, now her. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Because we're still playing defense. That ends now. If Kincaid wants to drag ghosts out of the past, then we drag his out too. Grace looked up sharply. You mean leverage? Ethan's eyes hardened. Exactly. I've spent years pretending I didn't know his skeletons. But if he wants war, he'll get it. That night, Ethan unlocked a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a slim black drive. The kind of thing people killed to keep hidden. Files, recordings, contracts, proof of Kincaid's crimes when he was still clawing his way up the ladder. He had promised Marco he'd never use it. But promises had already burned to ash. As he closed his hand around it, Ava's soft voice cut through the dark. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. If you're going to destroy him, she said, her eyes glinting with something fierce, then do it for me. Not for Marco. Not for your promise. For me. Ethan's chest tightened. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him as her enemy. She was looking at him as her shield. And in that moment, he swore, not just silently, not just to Marco, but out loud to her, for you, Ava, always. But deep down, he knew, once this weapon was unleashed, there would be no turning back. The thumb drive was smaller than Ethan remembered, a matte black sliver, unremarkable until you knew what it contained. He turned it over once in his palm, as if the plastic might be warm from the years it had spent locked away. On the desk beside him, the city yawned open through glass. Gray sky, slick roofs, river like a ribbon of pewter. Somewhere out there, Victor Kincaid was rehearsing his next lie. Somewhere closer, a 17-year-old girl was deciding who to trust with whatever was left of her world. Grace stood at the edge of his peripheral vision, a legal pad balanced on her forearm. We release too much, he claims retaliation. We release too little, he calls bluff. We have to thread it. Ethan nodded. We don't dump. We seed. Grace's eyes flicked to the laptop. Target. 3. He lifted a finger with each name. State AG's white-collar unit. The Financial Crimes Task Force working the Hale bankruptcy remnant. And a reporter who knows how not to get used. Grace's mouth pulled into the ghost of a smile. Faye Benton. She doesn't love me. Ethan said, which is why she might believe me. Grace set her pad down. One more thing. If we do this, discovery becomes a minefield. He'll argue we're poisoning the well. He'll ask for sanctions. He'll ask the judge to tighten the TRO. Then we do it clean, Ethan said. Chain of custody, verified hashes, redactions for anything that touches Ava. A door clicked softly behind them. Ava hovered in the threshold, hoodie tied at the throat, hair pulled back like she'd done it in the elevator. Her eyes were calmer than last night's, but the calm had a brittle sheen. Are you going to blow him up or not? She asked. Ethan looked at her, and for a moment, saw Marco propped on a dorm bed with a soldering iron and a grin that said rules were for people with less imagination. Yes, he said, but the blast radius is not going to touch you. I'm not made of glass, she said, stepping into the room. If you break him, he'll try to break me. He's already trying. Grace's phone lit with an alert. He filed a motion to compel Catherine's cooperation in full. Wants her communications with you, with us, everything. She hesitated, and he moved to formalize a temporary care plan, placing Ava with a court-approved guardian until merits are decided. Ava's spine stiffened. Not happening. Ethan didn't look away from her. Not happening. Grace flipped to a clean page. We propose an alternative, a neutral interim guardian acceptable to the court and to Ava. She lifted her hand half in jest, half in threat. I am a barred attorney with no financial stake. Ava's gaze softened at the edges, with a very sharp jawline and no bedside manner. Grace huffed. Lawyers aren't for bedside. We're for knives. Ethan slid the thumb drive toward her. Pull the threads we can verify without opening our throats. If we make him bleed in public, he'll want to feed the court a headline. Ward manipulates teen. Court intervenes. We get ahead of it with a motion to modify the TRO, allow contact only with counsel present. It makes us look constrained and responsible. And it gives her back her voice, Grace said quietly, glancing at Ava. On the record. Ava's eyes went to the window again. The river, the small, unimportant boats moving toward errands that didn't break anyone's heart. I want to see her, she said. Catherine, Ethan asked. She's my mother. Ava swallowed. Truth doesn't become less true because it hurts to look at. Grace waited, then checked her watch. If we go under the shield of the motion. Everything on the record is a statement against Kincaid's theory that you're being coerced by Ethan. We build a trail that shows every choice is yours. Ava nodded. My choices, not his. The courthouse corridor smelled like scuffed tile and old coffee. By 10 a.m., the judge had packed her calendar. Theirs was an add-on, an emergency motion inside the hurricane that their case had become. Grace stood, posture knife straight. Your Honor, the petitioner has poisoned the press in this proceeding with strategic leaks and a questionable witness. We request a narrow modification of the TRO, that the minor may confer with Ethan Ward in the presence of counsel and social services. Kincaid's lawyer rose with a condescending incline of the head. Your Honor, the respondent's narrow request is an invitation to manipulate a vulnerable minor in hallways and conference rooms. There is no guardian ad litem appointed, and the respondent is a billionaire accustomed to getting what he wants. The judge's gaze slid to Ava. Miss Reyes. Ava stood. Her voice was steady, which cost her. I don't need a billionaire to think for me. I need to be allowed to speak to the one person my father trusted, with my lawyer sitting there. That's the request. Something in the judge's face shifted. Not warmth, precisely, but respect for economy. Motion granted in part. Communications may occur in counsel's presence. Limited to 1 hour per day. No private contact. Social worker may observe at her discretion. Kincaid's jaw flexed. He leaned toward his attorney and spoke through his teeth. The attorney stood again. And our motion to place the minor with a neutral guardian? Denied at this time, the judge said. We'll revisit after next week's evidentiary hearing. Ava sat slowly. Her exhale shivered through her and into Ethan, who felt it like a cable untightening one notch. Outside, under the same unlovely fluorescent, Catherine waited with her hands wrapped around a foam cup. She looked smaller than she had on the stand, as if truth had cost her inches. Can we? She asked, nodding to a side conference room. Grace's chin tipped once. On the record, they sat at the wrong kind of table, pitted laminate, acrylic chairs that squeaked when you shifted. Grace opened her laptop and announced the date and time. Catherine flinched at the formalities, then reached for Ava's hands and stopped a breath short when she remembered she forfeited the right to touch 17 years ago. "I didn't leave because I didn't love you," she said. "I left because I thought loving you looked like not blowing your life up." Ava's mouth made a small, angry shape. "You let him tell you that, and you let him tell me you were dead." Catherine swallowed. "I let fear tell me that. He didn't have to say the word. I had debt. My father's company had cratered. Kincaid was helping my family. Loans, connections, quiet favors, with interest rates you don't find on paper. When I found out I was pregnant, I told Marco I didn't want to sign our child into a ledger. He said he would keep you clean if I walked. He said he would keep you safe from men like Kincaid if I became an absence." Ava stared hard at the gouges in the table. "And if I don't want to be an absence anymore?" "Then don't be," Catherine said, the words tearing. "Let me stand where he told me to disappear." Ethan watched the muscles in Ava's jaw jump. Vulnerability was a weather pattern. You didn't predict it. You read it. He kept his mouth shut and learned. Catherine swiped at a tear she hadn't permitted. "I'm not here as Kincaid's knife," she managed. "He came for me, yes. He threatened to expose me, yes. He said I could be the one to bring clarity for you. And he said it like clarity and custody were the same thing. But when I saw you in Boston, it wasn't his plan I saw. It was you. I will testify to that under oath. He can go to hell." Grace's fingers slowed on the keys. "You'll put that in writing?" "Yes." Catherine's voice steadied. "And I'll give you every text and email he sent. You can see how he tried to script me." Grace nodded once. "We'll move to compel anyway, and we'll mark your cooperation." Catherine turned back to Ava. "I'm not asking you to choose me. I am asking you to choose yourself in front of me, whatever that looks like." Ava's breath caught. "I don't know who I am without him," she whispered. "And I don't know who I am with you." Catherine nodded, like someone accepting sentence. "Then we'll sit in that not knowing together until it becomes something else." Ava blinked hard. When she spoke, it came out low and raw. "I'll meet you for coffee. Not court. Not cameras. Coffee. 1 hour. No stories I can't verify." Catherine's laugh cracked. "I could do coffee." Grace clicked the recording off and looked at Ethan, a warning and an instruction folded into a glance. "Don't say anything you can't defend. Don't promise anything you can't keep." He nodded, and it felt like pulling a thread through skin. The leak went out at 3:07 p.m. A sterile package to the AG, a set of notarized declarations about chain of custody, a checksum for every file. A second package to the task force with a clean memo that read like a prosecution roadmap. Kincaid's shell companies, off-book transfers through distressed family funds, the purchase of debt as leverage, the names of 3 judges whose campaigns were inexplicably well-funded during key years. And then the third, an encrypted link to Faye Benton with a note that said, simply, "You don't owe me anything. You owe the truth something." At 4:22, Faye texted a single question. "Is the source exposed?" Ethan replied, "Only if someone starts a fire." At 5:03, the AG's office acknowledged receipt with a thank you that neither admitted nor denied a heartbeat. At 5:15, a task force investigator called Grace from a municipal number and asked for a meeting tomorrow at 9, off-site. At 5:41, Kincaid's lawyer filed a motion accusing Ethan of media manipulation and attempted extortion by reputational threat. At 6:02, the first alert hit. State AG opens review of investor Victor Kincaid's holdings. Faye's byline sat under it like a fuse, daring anyone to flick a light. By 7 o'clock, Ethan had his jacket on, attention split between 3 screens and the hollow ache behind his sternum that meant he'd made a choice that couldn't be unmade. That was when the knock came at his door, a soft, apologetic tap, like a neighbor asking for sugar. He opened it to a man in a Navy suit and a cop haircut. "Mr. Ward," the man said, "I'm Daniel Lorenz, Court Social Services. I'm here for a home visit." "You weren't on the schedule," Ethan said. Lorenz showed a badge, as if that solved something. "We can do these unannounced." "We can," Grace said from behind Ethan. but we don't when there's a protective order and a public safety concern. She stepped forward, tone clipped. Call your supervisor. Lorenz hesitated, then produced a phone. Grace waited while he explained, then took the handset. You are aware there is an active investigation into the petitioner's conduct? She asked into the air. You are aware that any unscheduled visitation will be construed by my client as harassment? Yes, you can speak to the judge tomorrow. No, you cannot inspect tonight. She handed the phone back. Another time. Lorenz cleared his throat. Understood. He pocketed his phone. Off the record, Mr. Ward, watch your doors. People who look like me sometimes don't work for me. When the door closed, the room exhaled. Ethan's hand stayed on the knob a second longer than it had to. Ava appeared at the end of the hallway. Jeans, high tops, hoodie, uncertainty. He gonna take me? Not tonight, Ethan said. Tomorrow? We'll make tomorrow answer to us, Grace said. Ava's mouth flattened, but some of the white disappeared from her knuckles. She looked at Ethan like she was trying to take his measurements. Where he would break, where he wouldn't. Coffee, she said. With her. Tomorrow at 8. A place with terrible muffins, so we don't pretend it's a movie. Ethan nodded. I'll sit 3 tables back. She almost smiled. 1 table. I'm not made of glass. The coffee shop on 49th bled light into the sidewalk. A rectangle of yellow in a morning that hadn't earned it yet. By the time Ava and Catherine sat with paper cups and something that called itself a blueberry muffin, Ethan had staked out a corner with a newspaper he didn't read and a line of sight he did. Grace was half a block away on the phone with the task force, her tote bag full of clean copies and clean knives. Ava didn't touch the muffin. Catherine did, because people who have lost things often eat to prove they're still here. Did you love him? Ava asked, not easing in, not offering soft landings. Yes, Catherine said, even when I shouldn't have. Did he love you? Yes, Catherine said again and winced. And no, he loved the idea of saving things more than the things themselves. Then why did he save me? Ava asked. Catherine's eyes did a small, miserable dance. Because saving you is the one thing that made him real. Ava tucked that away where she kept the sharpest truths. Did he know who my father was? Catherine stared at the steam rising pointlessly from her cup. I don't know. I told him it could be him. He said he would make it true even if it wasn't. So he made it true, Ava said, and her voice had the cadence of a verdict. She looked at her hands. Whoever the man was, he didn't come for me. Men rarely come for girls unless someone tells them they're theirs, Catherine said. Marco told himself, and you and the world that you were his. That mattered, even if it came wrapped in lies. Ava lifted the cup and took a sip she didn't want. I don't know how to hold both. That he lied, and that he loved me. You hold them like knives, Catherine said softly. Carefully, and you don't juggle. Ava's mouth quirked for half a heartbeat. She set the cup down and sat straighter. I'm not going with you, she said, and Catherine flinched even though she had come prepared to bleed. Not now. Not while this is a game other people are keeping score in. I'll see you. I'll call you. I'll ask you things I don't know how to ask anyone else. But I won't let him, she jerked her chin toward the idea of Kincaid, turn you into evidence. Catherine nodded, and something like pride made a brief, startled appearance on her face. Good, she said. That's right. She looked past Ava's shoulder, and her features arranged themselves into caution. Don't turn around, she whispered. 2 men just came in and didn't order anything. Ava's pulse quickened. She didn't turn. Instead, she watched Ethan's reflection in the window. He folded his unread paper and rose, slow, patient, a man going to get a napkin. By the time one of the men had moved 2 steps closer to the table, Ethan was behind him, one hand on his shoulder, light, apologetic, firm. Wrong line, Ethan said. We're meeting someone, the man said, showing teeth he thought were a smile. Not here, Ethan said. Not now. The other man lifted his phone just enough to show a lens. Ethan held his gaze, unblinking, until something animal in the man looked away. Catherine let out a breath she'd been holding since Boston. Ava stared at her reflection in the window and decided that strength sometimes looked like not flinching. Outside, on the corner, Grace lifted her phone. They peeled off, she said into Ethan's ear when he stepped back into his corner. I'll tail. No, Ethan said. Meet me at the garage under Cole Tower at 8:30. We have a 9 o'clock with people who can make this bigger than Kincaid. Task Force. Grace asked. And Benton, he said. You're making a bonfire, Grace said. I'm making a light, he said. The conference room in Municipal Building had no windows and no patience. 3 people from the task force sat at one end. A woman with a braid so tight it looked weaponized. A man with a wedding ring he spun when he was thinking, and an analyst whose eyes kept finding Grace's binder like it was dessert. Faye Benton sat on the long side. A recorder on the table she didn't bother hiding. Ethan slid the drive across and began to talk. He didn't tell a story. He laid track. Shell companies. Debts purchased for pennies and called favors for millions. A charity that wasn't a foundation that did everything but found. Judges, campaigns, PACs with names like Sunlight, but bank accounts like caves. He held Ava's name out of it, as if it had a skin that would slough off if touched too much. Why now? The braided woman asked. You've had this for years. Because now he is using a girl to launder himself, Ethan said. And because promising a dead man goes one way, but promising his daughter goes another. Faye watched his face the way you watch a suspect who might confess not to the crime, but to the needing. You'll take the hit if he says you're doing this to win a custody fight. I'll take the hit, Ethan said. I won't let her take it. The analyst cleared his throat. We'll need originals for the recordings. And we'll need your declaration. You'll have both, Grace said. The braided woman sat back. You understand once we move, it doesn't stop. It will be subpoenas and headlines and the kind of pressure that makes people do math on the rest of their lives. Ethan didn't look away. Do the math. Faye clicked her recorder off and looked at him not like prey, but like a man she had decided to be fair to. Off the record, she said. Do you love the girl? Ethan's eyes flicked, not to Grace, not to the task force, but to the idea of a 17-year-old sitting on a balcony with her knees to her chest and the lights of a city that thought everything was inventory. She's my friend's daughter, he said. Then, gentler, and she's my promise. Faye nodded, as if that was both an answer and a deflection. When they left the building, the sky had decided to pretend it was late summer. Sunlight slashed between buildings and made liars of the cold fronts. Grace tucked the drive back in her bag. Ethan tucked whatever was left of his hesitation into a place he couldn't reach if he tried. His phone buzzed. A text. No name, no number, just a sentence that landed like a nail driven through wood. Bridge. Now. He stared at it, his skin tightening. Another text arrived before the echo faded. Same place Marco called from when he said he couldn't outrun the math. He lifted his gaze to Grace. You want to meet? Kincaid, Grace asked. Or someone who want me to think he is? Grace shook her head. Don't go. He slid the phone into his pocket. I'm not. What are you doing? She asked, exactly as if she already knew. He looked toward the east, where the river made a silver argument for courage. I'm going to get there first. The bridge hummed under traffic, an electrical thing even in daylight. Ethan stood in the pedestrian curve where the girders hemmed in a view of water that didn't care what men did above it. He had a cap pulled low, a jacket that wasn't his usual silhouette. He had a second phone and a third plan and the muscle memory of a different life in which he had been the one being hunted. A shadow detached itself from the support and became a man. Not Kincaid. Younger. Narrower. A face you'd forget until the moment you shouldn't. He stopped 6 feet away and smiled like they were friends from camp. You came, the man said. Wrong answer, Ethan said. The man's smile widened. Message delivered. He says, you can keep the girl temporarily, you can keep the press, you can keep your old files. He'll keep the thing you're really afraid of. Ethan didn't blink. Which is? The part where the petition wasn't a fabrication, the man said pleasantly. The part where your friend wrote a case against you that a court could believe. The part where you and he took something that wasn't yours and called it entrepreneurship. Ethan let the words pass over him and then around him, refusing purchase. Tell him to bring it to court. Tell him to bring all of it. And tell him that when he does, I will be sitting next to a girl who, if she was born of lies, turned them into a life that makes his ledger look like it was kept by a coward. The man's eyelids lowered in the slow blink of a predator who had found an unexpected rock in his path. He also says, "Bridge night wasn't about you." For half a second, the city narrowed to a keyhole. What? The man lifted one shoulder. Ask Marco's addendum. There's more under the more. A passphrase with a lock you haven't picked. Bridge night wasn't about you. It was about her. He tipped two fingers in a salute that didn't respect anything and walked away into the hum of cars and steel. Ethan stood very still until the world unblurred. Then he pulled his phone and typed a message that went to exactly two people. To Grace. There's another layer in the addendum. Passphrase, bridge night. Find it. Now. To Ava. You're safe? Her reply came fast. With social worker. 1 hour window. Coffee was not awful. You okay? He typed and erased. Typed and erased. Finally, we're closer. And farther. I'll explain. She sent a single reply. Don't explain. When? He put the phone in his pocket and stared down at the river until it stopped being a mirror and went back to being water. Then he turned toward the fight he had chosen and the one that had chosen him. By the time he reached the penthouse, Grace had torn the addendum to digital pieces and stitched it back together in ways its author had not intended. She sat cross-legged on the rug like a student who didn't realize she had become a professor, screens glowing around her like campfires. There, she said, pointing. The passphrase isn't a phrase. It's a checksum. Bridge night is a key to a bundle, and the bundle is locked to a date stamp. What date? Ethan asked. She said it, and the floor under him tilted. The night Marco had texted him can't outrun the math. The night he died. The night the hospital called. The night the city asked a man who preferred spreadsheets to catastrophe to become a guardian to a girl who wasn't his and was more his than anything he'd ever built. Grace clicked, and a hidden file unfurled like a sting. Video. Grainy, but clear enough. Marco at a kitchen table. A clock on the wall. A baby carrier on the floor. Catherine off-screen saying, I can't do this alone. Marco saying, you won't. Then another voice, a third, male, familiar in the way a fire alarm is familiar even if you've never heard that specific one. Victor Kincaid, sign the Trust My Way, and the debt goes away. Or don't. I'll take one of you instead of both. Ethan leaned closer, breath held. Marco went still in the video. Then he reached for a pen. Grace paused the frame, and for a second the world pulled tight to a single pixel. Marco Reyes mid-choice, the math of his life catching up. There's your leverage, Grace said. There's his bridge night. He wasn't running from us. He was running for her. Ethan swallowed against something that wasn't grief and wasn't rage, but had hands made of both. We take it to the judge, he said. We take it to the AG. We take it to Faye. Grace nodded but didn't move. There's more, she said. She clicked again. The metadata spilled like confession. A second trustee, a name they had not seen in any document. A silent partner whose signature had been redacted in every copy that had ever gone public. Grace said the name out loud, and Ethan's face changed the way glass changes when it remembers it used to be sand. Of course, he said, very quietly. That's who taught him how to buy debt with blood. He picked up his phone and, for the first time since this started, called someone not to fight or to gather or to bluff. He called to warn. Ava answered on the second ring. Hey, there's a thing you need to hear before anyone else does, he said. It doesn't change what I promised. It does change what we're walking into. Okay, she said, and her voice had the steadiness of a girl who had decided coffee would be the measure of pain. Tell me. He told her about the video. He told her about bridge night. He told her about debt and choice and the weight of a pen. He did not tell her the silent partner's name. Not yet, because some truths you put on paper and some truths you place gently in a person's hands when a room is quiet and the door is locked. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then, so he didn't save me from a story. He wrote me into one and tried to edit around me. He tried to make you the chapter that survived, Ethan said. And you? She asked. What chapter are you? I'm a spine, he said, and heard how it sounded and didn't retract it. She made a sound that might one day be a laugh. When? She said again and hung up. Ethan lowered the phone and stared at the frozen video frame until the pixels meant less and the promise meant more. Outside, the city pulled itself together for evening. People who didn't know these names went home to people who didn't need them to. Somewhere across town, Victor Kincaid read a headline that wasn't about him yet and broke a glass because it would be. And in a room that smelled like paper and rain, a girl with hazel eyes sat at a table and wrote her own name on a form without asking anyone whether she was allowed. The fight had turned. The math had changed. Bridge night was not a memory anymore. It was a map. And maps, Ethan had learned, were only useful if you were willing to follow them into the dark. The courtroom was quieter than usual, which meant it was louder than hell. Quieter because every reporter, every clerk, every lawyer knew this was the hearing where blood might be drawn. Louder because silence has a weight, and that weight pressed into everyone's lungs until every throat cleared too sharply. Every shuffle of paper sounded like a fire alarm. Ethan sat at the defense table, chin low, tie loose enough to breathe. Grace adjusted a stack of exhibits like she was loading a gun. Ava sat behind them with the social worker, eyes level, body taut but unbowed. She had asked for no makeup, no armor, no spin. She wanted to be seen as she was, 17 and unwilling to vanish. Across the aisle, Victor Kincaid leaned back in his chair, cufflinks glinting, mouth curled in that infuriating shape between smirk and sneer. His lawyer whispered something, and he didn't even nod. He didn't need to. His presence was the nod. The judge entered, robes rustling like waves. We are here on petitioner's motions regarding custody and respondent's motion to admit new evidence. Her voice was gravel, and nobody missed the warning baked into it. Grace rose. Your Honor, the respondent moves to admit Exhibit 12, a digital recording authenticated by checksum and original metadata. It is a video statement by the decedent, Marco Reyes, establishing both intent and duress relevant to the trust at issue. Kincaid's lawyer was on his feet before she finished. Objection. Hearsay, prejudicial, lacks foundation. Grace didn't blink. Your Honor, Rule 807. Residual exception. This is a statement of material fact made under circumstances guaranteeing trustworthiness, with corroborating evidence of coercion. It is not offered for idle narrative, but to demonstrate the petitioner's influence on the creation and alteration of the trust. The judge held out her hand. Play it. The lights dimmed as the screen flickered to life. Grainy footage. Marco at the kitchen table. The baby carrier on the floor. Catherine's voice trembling. Kincaid's sharper voice promising relief or ruin. Then Marco's hand reaching for the pen. The room's air collapsed into itself. Ava stiffened, knuckles white. Ethan wanted to look at her, but didn't. He owed her the dignity of facing the storm without anchoring himself in her reaction. When the clip ended, silence reigned for a full 7 seconds. Then the judge exhaled like a gunshot. Motion to admit is granted. The court will weigh the probative value heavily. Kincaid's lawyer slammed his binder shut. Your Honor, this is a manipulation. A convenient found recording with no independent witness to its creation. We demand forensic verification and an evidentiary hearing. You'll have both, the judge said. But the recording is in. Kincaid's jaw flexed. He turned his head just enough to let Ethan see the promise in his eyes. This isn't over. Outside the courthouse, the reporters swarmed like bees around a wound. Microphones jutted toward Ava as though she were the story, not the victim. Miss Reyes, do you believe Mr. Ward manipulated this evidence? Miss Reyes, do you still recognize Victor Kincaid as a guardian figure? Miss Reyes, are you safe? Ethan tried to shield her path, but Ava stopped. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She faced them with a steadiness that cut sharper than their words. My father trusted Ethan Ward, she said, and now I trust him too. That's my answer. The cameras flashed like lightning. Somewhere, 1,000 headlines rewrote themselves. Kincaid's limo door slammed shut across the street, tinted glass hiding the fury boiling inside. But Ava had just stolen his weapon. She had chosen publicly. That night, Ethan's penthouse was quiet except for the hum of servers and the low murmur of Grace pacing with a phone glued to her ear. Calls with the AG's office. Calls with the task force. Calls with people whose numbers Ethan hadn't dialed in years. Ava sat at the window, City lights sprawled beneath her like a constellation no one had named yet. She hugged her knees, forehead resting lightly against the glass. "He'll come harder now," she said softly, almost to herself. Ethan, standing a few feet behind, answered anyway. "Then we brace harder." She turned her head. "Why are you still here? You don't owe me. You could walk away." Ethan met her gaze, steady. "Because a promise doesn't expire just because it gets inconvenient." Her lips trembled, not quite a smile. "That's what he used to say. My dad." "Then he was right," Ethan said. But the storm didn't wait for morning. At 2:14 a.m., alarms screamed through the penthouse. Not fire, not burglary. Something worse, breach detected. A system Ethan had built himself, triggered by a digital fingerprint he hadn't seen in years. Grace bolted from the guest room, laptop already open, hair wild but eyes razor-sharp. "They're in the network," she hissed. "Not amateurs. This is government grade." Someone gave them a key. Ethan's gut turned cold. Not a hack. A handoff. The screens flickered, passwords shredded, files spilling into dark pipelines. Among them, Ava's sealed guardianship documents. If those went public, every legal argument, every protective order, every fragile gain, they'd all collapse. "Kill the connection," Ethan barked. "I'm trying." Grace snapped, fingers flying. "They're bouncing off international relays. Whoever this is, they knew exactly where to cut." Ava stumbled in, barefoot, wide-eyed. "What's happening?" "They're coming for you," Ethan said. Grace's laptop beeped, high-pitched, desperate. "We can't hold them here. We have to move." Ethan grabbed a go-bag he hadn't touched in years. "We're not waiting for them to walk through the front door." "But where?" Ava began. "Somewhere safe," Ethan cut in. "Somewhere he doesn't own." He looked at Grace. "Black site." Grace hesitated. "That's nuclear. You disappear her, you disappear yourself. But it buys time." "Do it," Ethan said. Grace slammed her laptop shut, yanking a hard drive free. "Then we move now." Outside, sirens wailed somewhere too close. Ava clutched Ethan's arm, eyes burning with questions and fear. "Are we running?" she whispered. Ethan met her gaze. "No, we're surviving. Running comes later." By dawn, Ethan's penthouse was empty. Papers scattered, screens black, coffee still cooling on the counter. And on Victor Kincaid's desk across the city, a flash drive sat waiting. Someone had delivered it in the night, wrapped in plain paper, anonymous handwriting scrawled across the front. Everything he swore to protect. Kincaid smiled, slow and poisonous. The war had just gone from courtrooms to shadows. And in those shadows, promises were hardest to keep. The SUV carved a line through the empty highway at 3 a.m., headlights slicing shadows into halves. Ethan's hands were steady on the wheel, but his jaw was clenched hard enough to ache. Beside him, Grace typed furiously on her laptop, the glow casting her features in ghostly light. In the back seat, Ava hugged her knees, her cheek pressed against the cold glass as city lights receded into the dark horizon. They didn't speak for a long time. Silence was safer than words. Words made things real. But eventually, Ava broke it. "Where are we going?" Ethan didn't look back. "Somewhere Kincaid doesn't own." Grace glanced up. "That narrows it down to about 3 places on this coast." Ethan's mouth ticked, but his eyes stayed on the road. "Good thing one of them still owes me a favor." Ava pressed. "Who?" "A friend," Ethan said simply. "And that's all you need to know right now." By dawn, they reached the outskirts of Vermont. Mountains rose like dark guardians, forests thick with mist. Ethan turned off the main road onto a dirt track, winding until a faded lodge appeared, half hidden by pines. It wasn't much, wood panels peeling, windows shuttered, but the security system embedded in its bones was anything but outdated. Ethan keyed a code into a discrete panel, and the lock clicked open. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. Ava dropped her bag and looked around. "This is safe. As safe as it gets," Ethan said. Grace muttered, "Until Kincaid buys the state." For 2 days, they lived like shadows. Grace worked nonstop, tracing digital trails, trying to plug holes in a dam already cracked. Ethan patrolled the perimeter like an old soldier, every creak of the forest making his hand twitch toward the weapon at his side. Ava drifted through the cabin like a ghost, alternately furious, grieving, and exhausted. But the world outside didn't forget them. On the third morning, Grace slammed her laptop shut, her face pale. "It's out." Ethan turned. "What's out?" She spun the screen. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Billionaire guardian or manipulator. Ward accused of controlling heir's fortune. Leaked files suggest Ava Reyes' parentage in doubt. Kincaid calls for federal probe into Ward's influence. Beneath them were images. Ethan at Marco's funeral, Ethan guiding Ava out of court, Ethan shielding her from reporters. Spun into something sinister. And worse, Catherine's photo was plastered everywhere, her tearful face framed as the mother betrayed. Ava's throat tightened. "He's making me look like I don't even belong to myself." Ethan's eyes darkened. "That's what he does. He erases until you believe the lie." Grace's tone was flat. "It's working. Public opinion's turning. If we go back to court like this, we'll be crucified." That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She found Ethan sitting outside on the porch, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. "You don't smoke," she said softly. He startled, then smirked faintly. "Never had to. Just needed something to do with my hands." She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around herself. "Why are you still here? You've lost everything because of me." Ethan shook his head. "Not because of you. Because of him. Kincaid." "But Marco lied." Ava whispered, voice raw. "About her. About me. And you knew some of it. You kept it from me." He looked at her then, eyes tired but unwavering. "I kept it because Marco asked me to. Because he thought the truth would break you." Ava's lip trembled. "Maybe it already has." Ethan reached out, hesitated, then rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then let me help put you back together. Not because of him. Because of you." For a moment, she didn't pull away. But safety was an illusion. On the fifth day, Grace burst into the room, face taut. "We've been burnt." Ethan straightened. "Ow!" Someone on the inside. One of Marco's old circle. They leaked the access keys. They had to. No one else could have breached like that. Ethan's gut dropped. "Who?" Grace hesitated. "Diana Cole." The name cut sharp. Diana, Marco's former CFO, the woman who had balanced his empire, who had once toasted Ethan as family. "She's with Kincaid now," Grace said grimly. "Feeding him everything. She sold you both out." Ava's face drained of color. "She was on my birthdays. She bought me my first necklace." Ethan's hands clenched. "And now she's cashing you in like stock." The betrayal shifted everything. Within hours, Kincaid's campaign escalated. He staged interviews, parading Diana as the credible insider. She painted Ethan as manipulative, claiming he isolated Ava, that Marco had doubts about naming him guardian. "Every story he's telling is seeded with just enough truth to stick," Grace spat. Ethan's chest burned. "Then we tear it out by the roots." But before they could plan their counterstrike, another blow landed. The FBI announced they were reviewing the trust case. Not because of Kincaid's petition, but because of the leaked files, which meant federal agents would come knocking, and their safe house wasn't safe anymore. That night, Ava stood before Ethan, trembling but fierce. "We can't hide forever," she said. "If we keep running, he wins. He turns me into the ghost he wants me to be." Ethan shook his head. "It's not that simple. He has every lever: money, media, law enforcement. He'll grind you down until you can't breathe. Then we stop letting him choose the battlefield." Ava snapped. "We go public. We take it straight to the people." Grace raised her brows. "You mean tell the story ourselves?" "Yes," Ava said, fire in her eyes. "My story. Not his. Not Marco's. Mine." Ethan studied her, heart heavy. She looked so much like Marco in that moment, reckless, brilliant, defiant. He knew it was dangerous, but he also knew she was right. "Then we do it," he said. Her eyes widened. "You'll help me?" He nodded slowly. "I promised I'd stand beside you. That means on the record, too." The next day, while Kincaid strutted through press conferences, Ethan, Grace, and Ava prepared their own. Not polished, not staged, just Ava, speaking her truth. But as the cameras rolled, as Ava stepped up to the microphone, a message buzzed on Ethan's phone. No sender, just a single line. If she speaks, she doesn't make it home. Ethan's blood ran cold. He looked at Ava, her hands gripping the podium, her voice steady as she began to tell her story. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if keeping his promise meant standing beside her or dragging her away before it was too late. The room was thick with cameras, microphones, and restless energy. Dozens of journalists were packed shoulder to shoulder, their pens poised, recorders blinking red, waiting to devour whatever came next. For days the story had belonged to Victor Kincaid, his headlines, his spin, his weaponized witnesses. But tonight, for the first time, the stage belonged to Ava. Ethan could hear his own pulse. His phone still burned in his pocket, the message repeating in his head like a curse. If she speaks, she doesn't make it home. He stood just a few feet from the podium, arms crossed tightly, body wired for violence. Grace stood near the side exit, laptop open, scanning for chatter across encrypted channels, her jaw taut. They had run the risk assessment a dozen times before agreeing to this, and it had looked survivable, barely. But the text changed everything. And then Ava stepped forward. She wasn't wearing designer clothes. No polished makeup, no choreographed stage lights. Just a simple navy jacket and her hair pulled back, strands falling loose across her temples. She looked every bit 17, young enough to be underestimated, old enough to burn the world with a single sentence. The first flashes went off. Reporters surged closer. Ethan tensed. Ava gripped the podium and leaned toward the microphone. Her voice wavered at first, but it was her voice, clear, unshaken. "My name is Ava Reyes," she began. "You've heard a lot about me. Most of it has been lies. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the truth." In the back row, one journalist whispered into her recorder, "Breaking now. Ward of late billionaire Marco Reyes finally speaks." Ava's hands tightened. "I was raised by Marco Reyes. He was my father. He loved me. And no matter what papers or petitions say, nothing changes that. But he isn't here anymore, and the people fighting over his fortune aren't protecting his memory or me. They're protecting their own power." Ethan's chest ached with both pride and dread. Ava drew a shaky breath. "Victor Kincaid says I don't belong, that I'm a pawn, that my life should be signed away like a contract. But I'm not a pawn. I'm not his. I'm not anyone's property. I'm a person, and I deserve to choose what happens to me." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on her face, catching the flush in her cheeks, the raw force in her eyes. But Ethan's gaze wasn't on her words. It was on the room, on the man near the back who wasn't writing anything, just standing too still, on the woman by the side door whose jacket bulged in the wrong place, on the glint of metal tucked where it shouldn't be. The threat wasn't abstract. It was here. Grace caught it too. Her eyes snapped to Ethan, subtle but sharp. A nod. Two operatives. Back inside. Ethan's pulse kicked hard. He shifted closer to Ava, ready to grab her the moment she finished. But Ava wasn't finished. "I know there are secrets about my birth, about my mother, about who Marco was. I know the truth is messy. But I also know he trusted Ethan Ward to protect me. And I trust him too." She said it out loud, clear enough for every microphone to catch. And just like that, she shifted the narrative. The headlines would no longer be, "Is Ethan Ward manipulating Ava?" They would be, "Ava chooses her guardian." Flashes detonated like fireworks. Questions flew. "Ava, do you claim Ethan Ward as your legal guardian? Do you reject Victor Kincaid's custody petition?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I reject it, and I reject his control. My life is mine." Ethan wanted to drag her off the stage, to shield her, but the surge of pride nearly rooted him to the floor. Then movement, fast. The man in the back reached under his coat. Ethan's instincts detonated. He lunged forward, grabbed Ava by the arm, yanked her sideways just as Grace shouted, "Down." A muffled pop cracked through the air. Screams tore the room. Reporters ducked. Chairs clattered. Chaos. Ethan shoved Ava behind the podium, using his body as a shield. Security stormed the room too late, tackling the man near the back. The woman by the side, door bolted, vanishing into the stampede of fleeing journalists. But the damage was done. The press conference was no longer a story. It was a battleground. They fled through the service corridor, Grace leading with her laptop pressed tight to her chest, Ethan gripping Ava's hand, as if letting go would mean losing her forever. Sirens wailed outside already. Someone had called it in. In the alley, a black van screeched up, doors flung open. Not Kincaid's men, Ethan's contingency. Two of his oldest operatives, men who owed him debts measured in blood. Go, one barked. They piled in. Tires squealed. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow. Ava's chest heaved, eyes wide, her hands still locked in Ethan's. I told you, she gasped, voice breaking. He'd come for me. Ethan cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. And he failed, because you're still here. But he knew it wouldn't stop. The press conference had shifted public opinion, yes. But it had also painted a target larger than ever on Ava's back. Hours later, in another safe house, this one buried beneath a shuttered warehouse on the waterfront, Grace spread out her findings. That wasn't Kincaid's usual play, she said grimly. He doesn't get his hands dirty like that. Those shooters, mercenaries, contracted. But guess who signed the wire transfers? She pushed a photo across the table. Diana Cole. Ethan's gut twisted. Marco's old CFO. The woman who'd once toasted Ava's birthdays. She's bankrolling the muscle, Grace said. Kincaid's running the narrative. She's paying for the violence. Together, they're closing the noose. Ava's fists trembled on her knees. She was supposed to be family. Ethan crouched before her. Family isn't who shares your blood, Ava. It's who bleeds for you. Don't forget that. Her eyes glistened. And you've bled enough already. He shook his head. Not enough. Not until you're safe. By morning, the press was ablaze. Footage of Ava's speech was everywhere. Her defiance, her declaration, her choice. But just as viral were the screams, the stampede, the shot. Commentators split in two, half lauding her bravery, half questioning Ethan's recklessness in letting her step into danger. Kincaid capitalized immediately, calling for her protective custody under federal supervision, painting Ethan as unstable, even dangerous. Grace slammed the TV off. He's trying to frame you as the threat now. Classic inversion. Ethan exhaled, tired but cold. Then we flip it back. Ow, Ava asked. Ethan met her gaze, steady. By taking the war where he doesn't expect it. Not court, not cameras. Straight into the shadows, where his empire rots. Ava swallowed, fear and fire warring in her chest. And if we lose, then we lose on our terms, Ethan said. But we won't lose. Not while I still breathe. For a long moment, she stared at him. Then she nodded. Then let's finish it. That night, as Ava finally drifted into restless sleep, Ethan stood watch at the window, Grace beside him. You realize what she did today? Grace whispered. Ethan nodded. She took her life back. Grace's eyes softened. And you finally stopped protecting Marco's ghost. You protected her. Ethan's chest ached, but he allowed himself the smallest truth. For the first time, the promise isn't about him anymore. It's about her. Outside, the city's skyline glimmered, oblivious to the war boiling beneath. Ethan's phone buzzed again, another anonymous message. Next time I don't miss. He deleted it without reading twice. Because next time, he'd be ready. The warehouse, safe house was dark, its windows covered, its walls humming faintly with servers Grace had patched together. The air smelled faintly of salt and rust from the harbor beyond. Ethan sat at the metal table, maps and ledgers spread before him, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Grace was pacing, phone pressed her ear, voice low. Ava sat at the far end, her knees tucked to her chest, watching the blue glow of news feeds scroll across the screen. Every station still replayed her speech, spliced with footage of the attempted shooting. She'd become a symbol overnight, half a heroine, half a reckless child. She hated both versions. Ethan finally broke the silence. Kincaid doesn't just control the courts. He controls the pipelines, money, influence, favors bought and sold. We can't fight him with press conferences. We cut the veins feeding him. Grace ended her call, and tossed the burner phone on the table. Already working on it. Diana Cole's fingerprints are everywhere. Shell companies, blind trusts. She's laundering his muscle through nonprofits of all things. Ava frowned. Like charities? Fake ones, Grace said. Scholarship funds that never gave scholarships. Health initiatives that never bought a single syringe. She signs the checks. Kincaid pulls the strings. Ethan leaned forward. If we expose that, we don't just undermine his credibility. We give law enforcement something they can't ignore. Grace raised a brow. You mean the same law enforcement that's already circling us? The FBI review wasn't for show. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we make it so the Bureau has no choice but to turn on him. Ava whispered, "That's dangerous." Ethan met her eyes. Everything is dangerous now. 2 nights later, Ethan and Grace moved through the underbelly of the city. The warehouse district slept uneasy, shadows stretching long under flickering street lamps. Grace picked the lock on a side door of an accounting firm Diana Cole used as her hub. Inside, the office smelled of paper and stale coffee. Rows of filing cabinets loomed like soldiers. 5 minutes, Grace hissed. Ethan rifled through drawers with the efficiency of a man who'd lived in corporate boardrooms and war zones alike. Grace tapped furiously at a terminal, pulling data onto a flash drive. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Ethan froze. He glanced at Grace. She mouthed go. He slipped into the shadows as the door creaked open. A guard ambled in, flashlight slicing across the room. Ethan waited until the beam passed, then struck, swift, silent, rendering the man unconscious before he could shout. Grace exhaled hard. "You're insane." "Efficient," Ethan corrected. He hauled the guard into a supply closet. "Keep going." By the time they slipped back into the night, Grace had a hard drive full of damning data. Enough to prove Diana Cole wasn't just complicit. She was orchestrating. Meanwhile, Ava had asked to see Catherine. Against Ethan's better judgment, Grace arranged it, under secure conditions, in a church basement across town. The moment Ava stepped inside, Catherine rose from the pew where she'd been waiting. Her face was pale, drawn, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "Ava," she whispered. Ava froze. The memories hit hard. Her mother's hands smoothing her hair, her voice humming lullabies, her back retreating as Kincaid pulled her away years ago. "You lied," Ava said, her voice trembling. "All those years, you let him control you. Control me." Catherine's eyes flooded. "I was afraid. He had papers. He had threats. If I fought him, you would have been lost to me completely." "You lost me anyway," Ava snapped. Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks. "I thought I was protecting you. I was weak, yes, but I never stopped loving you." Ava's chest heaved. Part of her wanted to collapse into her mother's arms. Another part wanted to turn and never look back. "You signed something," Ava whispered. "Didn't you?" Something he's still holding. Catherine's silence was answer enough. Ava turned away, shaking. "Then you gave him a knife he's using on me now." Catherine reached out. "Let me fix it." Ava pulled back. "You can't. Not anymore." When she left the church, Ethan was waiting by the car. He said nothing, just opened the door. She slid in, silent tears streaking her face. Back at the safe house, Grace decrypted the files they'd stolen. The screen filled with scanned contracts, wire transfers, tax shelters. Enough to bury Diana Cole in prison for decades. But buried within the folders was something worse. A scanned affidavit, Catherine's signature at the bottom, declaring Ava's guardianship conditional and granting Kincaid discretionary oversight if Marco died. Ava stared at the screen as if it might burn her. "She gave me away." Ethan's hand curled into a fist. She signed under duress. "Look at the date." Same week Marco was coerced into amending the trust. They were working him and her at the same time. "But it's still her signature," Ava whispered. "Yes," Ethan said quietly, "but it doesn't define you." Her eyes filled with fury. "Then we burn it down." The next morning, Ethan prepared to leak Diana Cole's files to the press and the Bureau. Grace was stitching together the story, ready to drop it like a bomb. But before they could move, federal agents stormed the warehouse. "FBI, hand where we can see them," Ava screamed as armed men poured through the door. Ethan instinctively stepped in front of her, raising his hand slowly. Grace cursed under her breath, shoving the hard drive into her jacket. The lead agent barked, "Ethan Ward, you are under federal investigation for obstruction, tampering with evidence, and unlawful custody of a minor." Ava shouted, "No, he's protecting me." The agent's eyes were cold. "Ma'am, please step aside." Handcuffs snapped around Ethan's wrists. He met Ava's eyes as they dragged him toward the door. His voice was low, steady. "Don't let him win." Ava's chest cracked open with grief and rage as she watched them take him. And across town, Victor Kincaid watched the footage on his television, sipping brandy, smiling. The cell was cold. Concrete walls, steel bars, and a bed thin enough to bruise bone. Ethan sat on the edge, wrists raw from the cuffs, jaw tight. The hum of fluorescent lights drilled into his skull. Hours passed. Then the door clanged open. A man in a tailored suit entered, briefcase in hand, smile sharp as glass. "Mr. Ward," he said smoothly, "I represent certain interests who'd prefer this unpleasantness be resolved quietly." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Kincaid sent you." The man smirked. "Let's not name names. Here's the offer. Distance yourself from the girl. Sign a statement admitting you acted beyond your role. In exchange, charges vanish. You walk free." Ethan leaned forward, voice low and lethal. "Tell your employer I don't break promises. Not to Marco. Not to her." The smile faltered. The lawyer snapped his briefcase shut. "Then you'll rot here." When he left, Ethan closed his eyes, the words echoing, "Not to her." Across the city, Ava watched the news replay Ethan in handcuffs. Her hand shook as she clutched her phone. The anchor's voice dripped poison. Once trusted guardian Ethan Ward now faces charges of obstruction and unlawful custody. Is this the end of his fight against Victor Kincaid? Ava shut it off with a sob. Grace crouched beside her, gripping her shoulders. "Listen to me. This is exactly what he knew would happen. That's why he told you not to let Kincaid win." "But how?" Ava whispered. "He's gone. He's always been the shield. Without him," Grace's tone sharpened, "without him, you become the sword. It's your turn." Ava wiped her tears, breathing ragged. "Then teach me." Grace did. For days, they worked from the safe house. Grace taught Ava how to control a narrative, how to drop files into the right inboxes, how to turn raw documents into headlines no one could ignore. On the fifth night, Ava sat before a camera. Not a press conference this time, her own recording. No stage, no microphones. Just her and the truth. "My name is Ava Reyes," she said, eyes burning into the lens. "You've been told I don't belong, that I'm a pawn, that my guardian is a criminal. But the truth is, the criminals are the ones who think a child is property. The criminals are the ones hiding behind charities while they buy guns. Diana Cole, Victor Kincaid, this is what they've built." Grace edited the footage with the damning files flashing across the screen. Bank records, signatures, wire transfers. They released it at dawn. By noon, it was everywhere. Trending hashtags, outraged anchors, even members of Congress demanding investigations. For the first time, the tide shifted. But Ava knew it wasn't enough. Because Ethan wasn't free. She visited Catherine again, this time not for comfort, but for confrontation. They sat in the church basement once more. Catherine's hands trembled. "Ava, I saw the video. You're so brave. I never." "Stop." Ava cut in, her voice like steel. "You don't get to call me brave. You don't get to claim me. You sign me away." Catherine flinched. Tears welled. "I was afraid. So was I," Ava said. "My whole life. But fear doesn't excuse betrayal. I'm not yours to give away. I decide who I am." She rose. Catherine reached for her, but Ava pulled back. "If you want to help me now, then testify. Tell the world he forced you. Otherwise, stay out of my way." Catherine crumbled. Ava walked out taller than she'd ever felt. Grace discovered the loophole 2 days later. She shoved papers across the table. "Here, look. The trust amendment that gave Kincaid oversight. It's voidable. Marco signed under duress. Catherine, too. If Ethan testifies to what he saw the night Marco was pressured, the whole thing collapses." Ava's breath caught. "But he's locked away." Grace nodded grimly. Which means they'll try to keep him there. Or worse. Ava straightened. Then we bring the fight to them. In the open. Grace frowned. You mean court? I mean war, Ava said. On the morning of the hearing, Ava dressed in black. Not mourning, but armor. Grace walked beside her, reporters swarming as they approached the courthouse. Flashbulbs burst, questions flew. Ava, do you still support Ethan Ward? Do you have evidence against Victor Kincaid? Are you afraid for your safety? Ava paused on the steps, lifted her chin, and faced the cameras. I'm not afraid, she said clearly. Not of him. Not anymore. The crowd roared with questions. But she turned and walked into the courthouse, fire in her eyes. Inside, Victor Kincaid was already waiting. Immaculate suit, smug smile, Diana Cole at his side. He leaned toward her as she passed. You're alone now, he murmured. Ava met his gaze without blinking. So, was Marco, when you came for him? He didn't bow. Neither will I. His smile flickered. For the first time, she saw a crack. But as the gavel fell, the judge announced the latest twist. Before we proceed, this court has been informed that Ethan Ward, central to this case, will not be appearing today. He has been transferred to a federal facility on separate charges. Ava's blood ran cold. She turned to Grace, whispering, they're burying him. Grace's jaw set. Then we dig him out. And across the aisle, Kincaid leaned back, satisfied. The news broke before dawn. Federal detainee Ethan Ward transferred overnight to an undisclosed facility. The cheering scrolled endlessly across screens. Anchors speculating. Corruption charges, national security breaches, whispers that he might never stand trial. Ava stared at the TV in the safe house until her vision blurred. Her pulse thundered, but her body felt hollow. He was gone. Again. Grace shut the screen off. He's not gone, she said firmly. He's in their hands. And that means he's still alive. But Ava, if they succeed in burying him, this whole fight dies with him. Ava swallowed hard. Then we don't let them. At the undisclosed facility, a gray slab of concrete hidden deep in the countryside, Ethan sat chained at a steel table. 2 federal agents loomed across from him, papers spread out like a noose made of ink. You're finished, Ward, one agent sneered. Obstruction, fraud, endangering a minor. You'll never see daylight again. But cooperate, and maybe the girl walks free. Ethan's lips curled in a humorless smile. You think she needs me to walk free? The agent slammed a hand on the table. This is your last chance. Ethan leaned forward, voice like flint. No, this is yours. You've shackled yourself to Kincaid's leash. When it breaks, you fall with him. They glared, but beneath the bluster, Ethan saw the flicker of uncertainty. Back in the city, Ava made her choice. She asked Grace to prepare a broadcast, not a press statement, not a leak. A live address. If they wanted to silence Ethan by erasing him, Ava would make it impossible. At sundown, Ava stepped in front of cameras once more, hair braided back, eyes fierce. Grace stood beside her like a sentinel. My name is Ava Reyes, she said, steady and strong. Tonight, I speak not as a pawn in someone else's game, but as a daughter, as a survivor, as the person Marco Reyes raised me to be. Victor Kincaid claims power over me. Diana Cole bankrolls his violence. And now, they've tried to erase Ethan Ward, the man Marco trusted with my life. But I refuse to let them. She raised a hand. Grace flashed documents across the screen. Diana Cole's financial webs, Catherine's coerced affidavit, wire transfers to mercenaries. They want silence. They want fear. But I will not be silent, and I will not be afraid. Millions watched live. Hashtags surged, phones buzzed, comment feeds exploded. Politicians began calling for investigations into Kincaid and Cole. But the price came swift. Minutes after the broadcast, the power in the safe house flickered. Tires screeched outside. Grace cursed. They found us. The raid was fast, brutal. Masked men storming through doors, flashbangs exploding. Grace grabbed Ava, shoving her toward a hidden exit. Run! Grace shouted. Ava stumbled into the alley, choking on smoke, her ears ringing. A shadow loomed. Victor Kincaid himself, flanked by 2 armed men. Well, he drawled. The prodigal heiress. Ava froze, heart pounding. You should have played your part, Kincaid sneered. Obedient, quiet. Instead, you made yourself a problem. And problems, he gestured lazily, get erased. A gun lifted. Before Ava could scream, headlights blazed. A van roared down the alley, brakes screeching. The back doors flew open. Ethan Ward leapt out, bruised, bloodied but free. He moved like a storm, disarming one guard with a twist, slamming the other against the wall, dragging Ava behind him. His voice was steel. You don't touch her. Kincaid's eyes widened. Impossible. Nothing, Ethan snarled, is impossible when you've got something worth bleeding for. The fight was chaos. Ethan traded blows with Kincaid's men, raw fury driving him past exhaustion. Grace appeared from the shadows, swinging a length of pipe, leveling one of the mercenaries. Ava, trembling, grabbed a drop phone and streamed live. Millions of viewers saw it unfold. Victor Kincaid caught in the act, violence on full display, his empires wrought bleeding into daylight. Cornered, Kincaid lunged at Ava himself, hands outstretched. You belong to me, he roared. Ava raised her voice, louder than fear. I belong to no one. Ethan shoved between them, slamming Kincaid to the ground. Police sirens wailed in the distance, drawn by the chaos, and by the live stream Ava had unleashed. Kincaid struggled, spitting curses, but Ethan pinned him until officers swarmed the alley, hauling him away in cuffs. Diana Cole was arrested hours later, her financial empire unraveling on live television. Days passed. Investigations mounted. Charges against Ethan dissolved under the weight of evidence Grace had secured. Catherine testified at last, exposing how Kincaid coerced her. The trust was restored. But more than legal battles, something deeper had shifted. On the courthouse steps, reporters shouted questions. Ava stood between Ethan and Grace, her shoulders squared, her voice clear. My father's promise was that I would never be alone. Ethan Ward kept that promise. And now I choose to keep it too. This fight was never just about money. It was about freedom, about love, and about truth. The crowd erupted. Flashes lit the dusk. Ethan glanced at her, pride softening the scars on his face. You don't need me to shield you anymore. Ava smiled faintly, slipping her hand into his. Maybe not, but I still want you here. That night, back at the safe house, quiet now, stripped of fear, they sat together in the glow of the city lights. Grace clinked a glass against Ethan's. You realize you've created a legend, right? The billionaire who fought an empire for a girl who wasn't even his. Ethan smirked tiredly. She is mine, not by blood, but by choice. Ava leaned her head against his shoulder. And I'm yours, because you kept the promise when no one else did. Silence stretched, warm and fragile. Finally, Ethan whispered the words he'd carried for years. Marco, I kept it. She's safe. She's strong. She's free. Outside, the city pulsed, alive with new stories. But for the first time in years, Ethan Ward felt peace. Because the forgotten promise was no longer forgotten. It was fulfilled.